With the end of October, Tesla AI decided to not only tell us what they've done, but what they're planning on doing in some detail over the next few months. And considering that we haven't had an AI day in 2 years, since September of 2022, this post is one of the best treasure troves of information that we've gotten in quite a while and reveals a lot about Tesla's plans and how they're going to execute it. So let's take a look. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. So I'm going to start with what they've completed. These are things that we've already talked about, but what's much more interesting is the what's coming next. Anyway, as Tesla posted yesterday, as October comes to a close, here's an update on the releases. What we've completed: end-to-end highway has shipped to approximately 50,000 customers with 12.5.6.1 and also on Cybertruck, by the way. A Cybertruck build that improves responsiveness. Successful We Robot event with 50 autonomous Teslas safely transporting over 2,000 passengers. That's a statistic that we may not have known exactly before. I believe that 2,500 people were at the event itself, so that means that most of the people got rides on autonomous vehicles. Of course, Scott Walter and I did. If you haven't seen that video, definitely check it out. We're like kids in candy stores, so it is a lot of fun. Anyway, enjoy that when you get a chance. So that's a cool statistic, but what's really interesting here is what's down below. So here's what's coming next: a full rollout of end-to-end highway driving to all AI4 users. That would be hardware 4 to most of us. I'm trying to transition to calling it AI4. I keep calling it hardware 4, but anyway, it's just a branding change. The computer is exactly the same, and they're going to call the next one AI5. Moving forward, it'll be called AI instead of hardware, which makes sense. That's what this thing does. Anyway, so that aside, they continue on, targeted for early next week, which is cool, so that we should see that very, very soon, including enhancements in stop smoothness, less annoying bad weather notifications. That will be nice from a user perspective, because sometimes you get like 2 raindrops or something like that, the windshield wiper goes, and then it's like degraded due to weather, bad weather, and then whatever. Anyway, it's very annoying, so that will be nice. It's not that big of a deal, but it will be nice for it to be a little bit more chill about the bad weather notifications and other safety improvements. So anyway, that's only coming to AI4 users and not to the hardware 3 folks, which is most of the vehicles. Of course, that would be sold before mid 2023. Our March 2023 Model 3 is hardware 3, and our September 2023 Model Y is hardware 4. So somewhere in the summer of 2023, so a bit over a year ago, is when the switch was made. If your car sort of falls in the middle of that and you're not sure, you can easily check in the interface by going to software and stuff and looking at it. Anyway, you can figure that stuff out if you're interested. And speaking of AI3 or hardware 3, improved 12.5.x models for AI3 city driving. I'm going to talk more about the differences between hardware 3 and hardware 4, AI3 and AI4. And forgive me, I will probably go back and forth between calling them these things throughout this video. So just understand I'm working on it, but I'll probably say the wrong word, but I'll use them interchangeably for now. But anyway, it's very important that they are still improving that branch as well. And I'll get into that more in just a minute, because there are specific things about that we need to talk about. Of course, ASS, or Actually Smart Summon, is going to be released to Europe, China, and other regions of the world. That's a big plus. I think folks in Europe and China will be pleasantly surprised to see that coming. That will be a little taste of the full self-driving goodness that all of us in the United States and Canada have access to already. And of course, hopefully more things will roll out soon. All right, then we get to version 13. We're on version 12.5.6 right now, things like that. Version 13 is a package of following major technology upgrades. This is where things get really interesting. Number 1, 36 hertz full resolution AI4 video inputs. If you don't know, the cameras in AI4 cars, so that would be our Model Y and our Cybertruck right now, those cameras have reduced resolution. They've artificially cropped them and made them lower resolution so that they mimic the AI3 cameras from several years ago. This is going to sort of unleash the beasts and allow them to operate at full resolution, so that will be really, really huge. And then in conjunction with that, we will get native AI4 inputs and neural network architectures. So this is, they're fully branching off AI3 and AI4 software forks right now. And that's going to allow AI4 to get fully native inputs instead of these sort of dumbed down artificial AI3 type inputs that they did originally to keep the 2 branches together, because development and especially training was very, very constrained. And we're going to get back to that in just a minute as well. But anyway, all of this is to say that they're going to unleash the power of hardware 4. Those of us who have been driving on hardware 4 thus far have not really seen the power of hardware 4. We'll see that with version 13 of full self-driving in the next couple of months, so that is going to be pretty outstanding. And skipping down to the bottom about timing, we are targeting a wide release with version 13.3 with most of the above improvements for AI4 vehicles around Thanksgiving. So it's really not even a couple of months. We're talking about a couple of weeks now. I think Thanksgiving is the 28th. That's pretty late in the month, but anyway, it's whatever the last Thursday is. But so we're only talking about 4 weeks or so here. So that's pretty cool. And then we get to some more specifics here. 3 times modeled context length scaling and 4.2 times data scaling. So what does this all mean? I'll actually start with the bottom two because I think that will be a little bit easier for people to understand. 3 times the model context length scaling basically gives the car more memory. So if the car right now can remember, like say the last 10 seconds or something, it could be looking at the last 30 seconds instead of the last 10 seconds. If it's now currently remembering about 20 seconds, we're looking at a minute. So that gives it, if you think about, if you had your mind erased, sort of like Memento style or something, if your mind was erased every 10 seconds or 20 seconds or something while you were driving and you kind of woke up and you're like, oh, where am I? Where am I, right? So you only had a tiny little window of time. It would be difficult to make long-term plans. And I have always called Tesla out on this. I've always said that their midterm planner, which I know they don't talk about, but I call it that. So the long-term planner is the navigation. That's your Google Maps. It's your Tesla thing with the blue line that tells you where to go. And then there's the second by second planner, which is don't crash into things. But the midterm planner, which is somewhere around 30 seconds or so, is going like, here I am, here's where I want to go. Do I need to prepare to go somewhere else? Let's say that you're in 2 lines of heavy traffic and you need to get into the right lane because you have to enter onto a highway or something, right? And you need to do that in the next 30 seconds or so. If your brain isn't smart enough, if your car is not smart enough to remember that full 30 seconds or a minute, however long this thing is, if it can't remember that much time, it doesn't really know until the last second, and then it goes, holy crap, I got to get over, right? And then that's where the car behaves badly, because all of a sudden it turns on its turn signal and nobody lets it in and it can't get in, and then it, you have to reroute and do all sorts of other crazy things instead. But if it knows 30 seconds to a minute in advance, and again, we don't know exactly what that time length is, but I believe we're probably looking at somewhere between 30 seconds and a minute with the 3x model scaling, then the car will be able to think ahead and go like, okay, heavy traffic, need to get in there. Here's a gap, I can fit in right now, turn the turn signal on and get in. All much smoother, much easier, much less stressful for us users of the vehicle and eventually the cybercab. So that is going to be huge. 4.2x data scaling is slightly less clear, but I believe what they're talking about is it's just going to have more memory. In other words, it's going to be able to remember more things at higher resolution, right? Because we're also talking about full resolution AI for video inputs. So that's going to increase the size of data that it's going to have to process. And if we're looking at longer lengths, it's going to be able to remember things for longer. It's going to put pressure on the amount of data that you have to hold in memory. So we're going to have to scale the data. So I believe that's what they're saying there. It's not perfectly clear to me, but I think that's what they're saying. And then we get to 3x model size scaling. So what that is the neural network. So the neural network, I don't believe is one monolithic neural network. I think there's a body to it. And then there's a bunch of inputs, neural network models, smaller ones, and a bunch of outputs. That's still end-to-end neural networks, but it's not just one monolithic one. It makes more sense because you can freeze different parts of the neural network and you can work on one thing. Let's say that the turning doesn't work, or what was it? The smoothness of the braking, I believe, was something that they talked about. Yeah, stop smoothness. So you want to work on that. So you go to the stop smoothness head, which is the part that controls the brakes, the brake pedal, that kind of thing. You can freeze everything else and just train that. Just put in data and figure out how to make that work better. Again, I don't know this, but at the very least, they can freeze portions of a monolithic network, but probably they have a trunk, a bunch of inputs, and a bunch of outputs that they can train individually, but it's all one, gigantic end-to-end neural network, but it's not all one neural network than one thing. I could be wrong about that, but I think at least a couple of years ago at AI Day 2 in 2022, that was what they talked about. But of course, that was back when Andre Carpathy was with them, so they may have altered their way of doing things. So I could be totally wrong. Just don't know at this point. But anyway, whatever it is, you're looking about effectively, if they had 1 billion parameters before, just to throw out a number, that is not accurate. I have no idea how many parameters they're talking about. But if it was 1 billion, we're now looking at 3 billion parameters. Because previously we had a 5x improvement when we got to 12.5. So if we'd had something like 200 million parameters previously, if that was the thing that was driving the car, a 5x would bump it to 1 billion. A further 3x would bump it to 3 billion. That gets basically basically impossible to fit into AI3 hardware. And that's where AI4 really will come into its own. It's got faster processing speed, but also a lot more memory. And so it's able to handle this bigger data load. And of course, if we go back to my video on Q3 earnings call AI update, definitely check it out up here if you haven't. I did a deep dive, and Elon, for the first time, they started to talk about the fact that hardware 3 might not be fully capable. This is the reason why. It just can't handle these larger and larger model sizes, and therefore it won't have the context length, it won't be as smart, all of that kind of stuff. And so they said if you bought FSD with your hardware 3 or AI3 vehicle, that they'll give you a free upgrade eventually. That's very, very cool of them. I think it's only about a 10% take rate on that, so they won't have to pay it out to everybody, but more than likely they will eventually have to upgrade these vehicles to AI4 in order for them to operate as effectively. Now, there is distillation, there's quantization, there's a lot of other things you can do, and the first versions of models are not optimized at all. So you're going to get this sort of bloatware. The neural network is going to be very, very large, and then over time you can sort of go like, oh, right, we can cut things out and stuff like that. Take, for example, as an analogy, not a perfect analogy, but let's take something like Llama 405B. So that's 405 billion parameters. You've got that. And what you can do is you can use that very, very intelligent model to distill out much of its intelligence into their teeny weeny 3 billion parameter model and make that model behave much more intelligently than it would be if it was just training on its own. So you can use the bigger model, in this case, AI4's, model, the big boy. Again, let's just say it's 3 billion parameters, whatever that is. And let's say that we max out at something like 500 million or 800 million parameters for AI3, just because that's all that can fit in memory. You can distill the intelligence of the larger model into the smaller one and then quantize the numbers. In other words, cut the resolution of the numbers and allow AI3 to operate pretty efficiently. So over time, ironically enough, what you're going to look at is there's going to be an interim time period where AI4 is going to be much better than AI3 hardware, but then over time, they'll be able to trickle down a lot of the intelligence from the really, really smart model into the stupider models. So eventually AI3 will catch up, but if you want to remain on the bleeding edge at this point, it is probably, if you have the financial means, probably a good idea to sell your old vehicle and buy a new one, if that is really important to you. If it's not, then whatever, it doesn't matter. Eventually AI3 will catch up or it will be replaced, but there's going to be an interim period of, I would guess, the next 12 months, maybe even longer than that, where AI3 will distinctly perform worse than AI4, and it will be significantly behind in terms of updates because they have to distill down the more intelligent model into the smaller, less intelligent model. Then we get to something that actually attaches a number to something that we've already heard about, which of course is their new Cortex training cluster in Texas. Really enables them to do more stuff. And specifically, they have 5x the training compute that they had previously. And that's from today going forward to the end of the year. There's another big jump. They're going to get 5x, or maybe that's from when Cortex came online. That's the whole thing. But whatever it is, that's big. And that's why Elon keeps talking about the fact that they're no longer compute constrained, because they have 5 times the compute that they used to have. That allows them to train much more efficiently. And again, if you watched my AI deep dive from the Q3 earnings, what Tesla is doing is flip-flopping. If you don't have a really big model that you can run at inference because it's on a car and it runs in a tiny little board, not in a server farm, you trade for that more data, more training, and especially more compute at training time. And so having 5x the training compute is a really big deal, because the vehicles themselves are not going to get better. The hardware is the hardware. You're stuck with what you have, but you can add a lot of training compute and allow the training to become much more efficient and create a much better model for the inference computer. And speaking of that, this actually made me really happy when I read this. Much improved reward predictions for collision avoidance following traffic controls, navigation, etc. So what does this mean? Neural networks are like students, and you have to have a teacher that understands what they're doing. If you've ever had a bad teacher that really was poor at informing you what the topic was, whether it was math or history or whatever, and then you compare that to like the best teacher in that topic, let's just take math, right? So you have a teacher that just is unable to get across to you why this is important, why you should care about that, how to do the procedure to get the correct answers, all of those kind of things. and you compare that to the best teacher you had that just, you were like, oh, yeah, it makes perfect sense. I love this stuff. I love math, right? You don't usually say that, but it's that kind of a thing. If you can define your reward function better, this is how these neural networks train. You give them input data, they predict what should happen next, and then you punish them or reward them based on the output, based on what it should be. And if you define your reward functions better, this is critically important. If you have that good teacher, quote unquote, you get much better output. It's very important. You also have to have good data. You can't have garbage data going in as well, but Tesla's been working on that for a while. But getting better reward functions for training, which at this point is very complicated. It's not something as simple as just thinking it up. More than likely, they're actually training AI networks, neural networks, to figure out what the reward function should be, because it's kind of sparse. If you could drive 1,000 miles before you see some sort of particular event, it's the kind of thing that you don't want to over bias for it, right? Let's say that once every 1,000 miles, somebody cuts you off, or, a truck pulls into your lane or something. You can't, if you over bias towards that, if you have poor reward functions, then the car becomes skittish. It's like every time it gets near a truck, it freaks out. And it's like, something like that. Like if you've ever been around a nervous driver that's just, a poor driver because they're so scared that something bad could happen. So generally speaking, the car has to be like, yeah, I'm going to bias towards the common behavior that a truck is not going to just suddenly drift into my lane. But on that rare occasion when it actually happens, I need to have the knowledge, the understanding of how to deal with that situation. And that's where a reward function, a very, very good reward function, can come in that doesn't over bias you to be skittish, but at the same time still allows you to be safe in those rare circumstances. And like I said, that's complicated. How do you create that reward function? More than likely what they're using is other neural networks. They're training them on the data to become the teacher. This is becoming a fairly standard practice in large language model training as well right now, and generative AI in general. And that is that you train a model that provides the reward function that says, this is how you should behave. And it can become very, very complicated, but you've got software talking to software, improving software. This is where that AGI, hockey stick thing is going to come from. It'll be computers improving computers, but that's the exact kind of thing I think you need here. Very, very cool to see that Tesla is saying that they're working on that and that they have output. They have these reward functions that they're now able to put inline into the system and train the inference computer to be better at collision avoidance, better at following traffic controls, better at navigation, all of that stuff. So that's going to be amazing. That should really help the midterm planner, that 30 to 60 second thing, right? Where you have to plan ahead, get into the lane you need to get into, think about things ahead of time. This is what separates a good driver from a poor driver, is that thinking ahead. Not so much the mechanical skills and the reaction time, although that's important, but that thinking ahead so that you never get into the situation that you could run into trouble. This next one I also find quite interesting: efficient representation of maps and navigation inputs. So however that's being ingested, again, that's the Google Maps thing, it's the blue line that tells you where to go. However that's being ingested right now apparently could be done more efficiently, and they've figured out a way to do that. So that's very cool. And then something I've been calling for years, actually, I did a video. If I can find it, I will post a link to it up here. It was about emergency vehicles and the fact that you need to be able to hear things in order to be very safe, right? If you're driving, a lot of times you will hear a siren before you see the emergency vehicle. That's extremely useful input. It's, fairly rare that it's that important, but it is very important. Or perhaps you hear, maybe a truck blows a tire near you and you hear that blah, 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 a big kind of sound of like a tire's just blown and the thing's, driving all over the place. That will inform you that you better pay attention, look around to see where that noise is coming from, because maybe that's the time when the truck is going to veer into your lane because they just blew a tire or something, right? So audio can be a very important input signal. The really interesting part here is that it was not immediately obvious that Teslas had built-in microphones. Now, I know they have the built-in megaphone thing where you can actually talk outside the car from inside the car. So in retrospect, it makes sense, but it's really cool to see that they say audio inputs for better handling of emergency vehicles. That will be really, really crucial, because again, the vehicle may not see the emergency vehicle, especially in the daytime. At night, you can see things from further away because, it's lights and all that kind of stuff. But in the daytime, especially if it's coming from behind you or something, you might hear it 20 or 30 seconds before you actually see it, because you're coming around a bend, over a hill. There's a lot of traffic in between you. That will really help improve safety around emergency vehicles. So that is a really cool thing to see. Okay, this next one, I have to admit, I'm a little confused exactly what this means, because it seems like it's two different things. So redesigned controller for smoother, more accurate tracking. The controller I think of as the output, as the things like the controls, but I must be thinking about that incorrectly. When you talk about tracking, I usually think of input information, like you're trying to track this, right? You have a tracker that tracks this cup around or tracks my face to make sure that I'm in focus all the time. Speaking of which, I've got primitive AI on my Sony camera that I'm recording with. So maybe that's what they're talking about here, is that they've got a better controller that does a better job of tracking important objects in a scene so that the vehicle can react to them appropriately. Again, I'm not exactly sure. If people know, please do let me know in the comments. This is just something that I read it and I read it again and I read it again. I was like, I'm not exactly sure what this means, but anyway, I have a basic idea, but I could be wrong. Anyway, if people know, definitely let me know, because I would like to learn. So there you go. Next up, we have a couple of new features that I think will be, it'll just make the experience, it'll add the icing on top, right, of the cake. Integrated unpark, reverse, and park capabilities. So integrated now means, as opposed to you having to stop and then you push the park button or something like that, that if you're going to Costco or wherever you're going, that it will arrive in the parking lot, and I assume that you would communicate with it somehow that you actually want to park instead of being dropped off at the front door, that it would then go to the parking place and it will park itself. Also, it will be able to reverse. Yay. I don't know if that's just in this situation when it's parking, but generally speaking, we're never going to have complete full self-driving until the vehicle can go in reverse. So this is really, really good news to see that. And then of course, parking capabilities as well. So this might just be in the context of park and unpark that it can go in reverse. That's still really nice. That's most of the time you need it, but once in a while you get stuck in a place on a road, you hit a dead end or something like that, and you have to back out of it or something. But most of the time when you need to go in reverse, it's in a parking lot type situation. So that'll be really nice. And then something that I'm going to be very happy about with the Cybertruck is support for destination options, including pulling over, parking in a spot, driveway, or garage. Garage is the big one. So this means that, like, when you say you're going to somebody's house, I guess they'll have to be more granular. Are you going to somebody's house to drop somebody off, in which case you just, stop on the side of the road? That makes sense. Are you going to their house to go to a dinner party, in which case you want to pull into their driveway? That's different. So it would pull into the driveway. And then of course there's the, I just got home and I need to park in the garage. The reason why I will be happy about that is, the Cybertruck is huge. And when we try to park it plus our Model Y in our garage, it barely fits. And it always makes me nervous backing the truck in and, trying to negotiate it. I'm still learning. We haven't had the truck that long. I'm getting better. But when I can just tell the truck, I can just leave it in the driveway and say, park yourself, that's going to be fantabulous. Or just get done with my, daily commute and it'll just back in for me and I don't have to worry about it. That's going to be outstanding. So I, for one, am very much looking forward to that feature. And then finally, one more: improved camera cleaning and handling of camera occlusions. Handling of camera occlusions makes sense. That's just when you get gook on the camera, right? So you're driving and a bird poops near the camera on the front and a little bit of that gets in the way of the camera, has to deal with that kind of stuff. Or if you're driving in the rear camera and you're kicking up rain while you're driving in a rainy situation, the rear camera will get quite occluded. So it needs to handle that. As for the camera cleaning, I'm not exactly sure how it's going to do that, because except for the Cybertruck, I think that's the only one that has any active cleaning capacity. I don't know how they would do that with a vehicle that doesn't have a mechanical cleaning capability, but I don't know. We'll see. Anyway, very interesting stuff to see coming down the pike. And then we get back to timing from Tesla. We have integrated several of these improvements and are already seeing a 4x improvement in miles between necessary interventions. I wish they would just give us a number, right? Is it 1,000? Is it 10,000? Is it 50? I don't know what that is. But anyway, compared to 12.5.4, they're seeing a 4x increase. So if it's 100 miles between interventions, safety critical ones, that's now 400 miles. If it's 1,000, it's 4,000 miles. Those are big numbers. Whatever it is, when you're not increasing by, 4% or something, but by 4x, those are big numbers. And then they continue, this lays the foundation for the V13 series, and we are targeting to ship V13.0 to internal customers by the end of this week. Now, when will we proletariat see that? It will be a while before we actually get to see that, I'm sure. And more than likely, we will never see 13.0. It'll be 13.0.1 or 2 or something after they do some safety testing and stuff like that. But still, that means it's going to be relatively soon. And then they say most of the remaining items are independently validated, which means they've already been independently approved. They've been tested and such, and will be integrated over November in a series of point releases. So again, we're not talking about halfway through next year. We're talking about this month. If it slips a little bit into December, yeah, maybe so. But this is, Tesla's AI team. This is not Elon with his optimism bias. This is Ashok Eloswamy and his team. And they, in the last several months, I mean, in September and October, they said what they were going to do, and they did it. So they're on time. So I really think we have a very high degree of probability that these things are all going to come to pass. That's very exciting news for those of us using full self-driving, and especially to hardware 4 owners, because we'll start to see real advances in the quality of the full self-driving that we have access to. Those who have hardware 3, it'll get to you eventually. It's just going to take more time. Sorry, there's just nothing you can do. It's just older hardware. There's, it's trying to cram something. It's like running a low resolution video game on an older machine where you can run all the bells and whistles on the latest with the big giant NVIDIA graphics card and stuff in it. And a real quick addendum here. Ashok posted this back on the 31st, but I somehow missed it until I was editing the video. But notice he says up here, lots of work, but the team's aiming to get to feature complete for unsupervised FSD with the version 13 series. What does that mean? That means the vehicle is going to have everything necessary for full self-driving, and I assume a cybercab or robotaxi by the time version 13 of the software is at full maturity. So that could take several months, obviously, but we're not looking at needing a version 14 or 15 or anything to get to feature completeness. So that's pretty amazing. And you can see Elon Musk responded to Ashok and said the rate of improvement is awesome. So Ashok is basically saying that they see the light at the end of the tunnel. I've used a metaphor previously about how you're walking through a forest in the dead of night and you can't see anything and you keep bumping into trees and not knowing which direction you're going and which way is the way out of the forest. Sounds like they've got not only a light, but they've got basically a path, and they understand how they're going to get from here to there very, very directly. That is pretty amazing stuff. And by the way, Figure asked, what about honking? And Ashok said, yeah, I'll add that to the list. So that was something they hadn't added yet, but they will add to the list. So the car will be able to honk as well. So for you New York drivers, that will be a big bonus, right? All right, so that's what I've got. In conclusion, I would really like to thank Tesla's AI team one more time. Thank you so much for telling us so much information. This is incredibly useful, and hopefully for those who are not as technically minded as maybe me, this video actually helps you to ingest and understand what's going on and why all of this is so important. Anyway, highly encourage the Tesla AI team to continue doing this, and I thank you all very much for doing it. And of course, if you have thoughts about all of this, please leave comments below. And while you're down there, if you don't mind subscribing, it really helps out the channel. I really want to make it to 100,000 subscribers before my birthday in late January. It's a big birthday, I promise, and it would be really cool to get there. That would be an awesome birthday present. So help me out. That would be great. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.